Usually, when you think about how apex predators operate, there's a pretty standard playbook.
Right, yeah, the classics.
Yeah, like you picture the African savanna or an Indian jungle. There's the stealthy approach, the explosive chase, the tackle, and then that classic clinical bite to the throat.
Exactly.
The goal is just really simple. Cut off the air supply.
It's a highly refined method, really.
Yeah.
It's built on exhaustion and suffocation, and it's safe, relatively speaking.
Right.
It keeps the predator away from the flailing hooves or horns of the prey, and it's what lions and tigers have perfected over, millions of years of evolution.
But the Jaguar throws that entire playbook out the window.
It really does.
Today we're diving deep into the biology, the mythology, and, well, the modern survival of the largest cat in the Americas. Okay, let's unpack this.
I'm ready.
Because unlike every other big cat on the planet that goes for the throat, the jaguar has a hunting method that is absolutely brutal.
Yeah, brutal is the word.
It bypasses the neck entirely and just bites directly through the skull of its prey.
Which is, it is entirely unique among the big cats.
Just wild to think about.
It is. And to really grasp what makes the jaguar such an evolutionary marvel, you have to understand that this animal isn't just a large predator.
Right.
It is this solitary force of nature that single-handedly shapes the ecosystems it inhabits, from the canopy all the way down to the rivers.
And to understand how it rules those ecosystems, we have to look at the sheer biological machinery of the animal, because just the physical dimensions are staggering.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about a cat that can grow up to 1.85 meters long. That's what, over 6 feet?
Yeah, over 6 feet long.
And they weigh up to 158 kilograms. But the thing is, it's not stretched out and lean like a cheetah,
Oh, far from it. No, they have an incredibly dense, stocky build.
Like a tank.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
If you look at their skeleton, their legs are actually shorter and significantly thicker than those of other large cats with similar body weights. They aren't built for, long, drawn-out sprints across an open plain. Their entire physiology is engineered for raw, concentrated power and close-quarters grappling.
You can see that power just looking at them, honestly. And of course, you can't picture a jaguar without that iconic coat.
Right, the pale yellow to tan fur.
Yeah, covered in those intricate spots. But I feel like a lot of people confuse them with leopards.
It happens all the time.
But if you look closely at a jaguar, those spots transition into larger flower-shaped patterns on their sides called rosettes. And the absolute dead giveaway.
The dot.
Yes. Inside those rosettes, there is a distinct central dot.
That central dot is the signature of the species. It's not just decorative either,
Right.
That pattern provides elite camouflage in environments with really dense vegetation. It basically breaks up the outline of their massive muscular body when they're hiding in patchy shadows, just waiting to ambush.
But that camouflage is really just the stealth delivery mechanism for the main weapon, the bite. We mentioned the skull crushing earlier, but the physics behind it are genuinely terrifying.
Oh, it's off the charts.
The jaguar has the third highest bite force of all feline species. A 100-kilogram jaguar can bite down with a force of nearly 5,000 newtons.
To put that 5,000 newtons into perspective for you, imagine taking the weight of a grand piano.
Okay, a grand piano.
And localizing all of that crushing downward force onto the sharp tip of a single canine tooth.
Ouch.
Yeah. That jaw strength allows them to casually do things no other cat would even attempt.
Like what?
Well, for instance, they regularly hunt the yellow-spotted Amazon River turtle.
A turtle?
Yeah, they literally just bite right through the thick, armored carapace of a giant turtle like it's a potato chip.
It's like nature designed a hydraulic press and then specifically evolved it into a biological can opener.
A very literal can opener.
And they use that exact same tool on mammals, right? When they hunt capybaras, which are these massive 80-pound rodents.
Huge rodent.
The jaguar's canine teeth pierce straight through the temporal bones of the skull. They shatter the bone and penetrate right into the brain, often driving their teeth directly through the animal's ears for an instant kill.
It's astonishingly efficient.
But wait, hold on. I have to ask. Why did this specific, brutal method evolve exclusively in jaguars? Why didn't lions or tigers develop the biological can opener?
What's fascinating here is that the answer lies deep in planetary history. Specifically, at the end of the Ice Age.
Okay, the Ice Age.
When the Pleistocene epoch wrapped up, there was a massive wave of extinctions. The giant, slow-moving mammalian prey of the Americas completely died out.
So the jaguar's ancestors suddenly found themselves staring at an empty buffet.
Exactly. They were stranded in an environment where the most abundant, reliable food sources left were armored reptiles.
Ah, so the giant turtles, tortoises, heavily scaled caimans.
Right. Over generations, the jaguars that survived were the ones with the shortest, most robust jaws and the thickest neck muscles, the ones capable of cracking open those shells.
That is wild. They literally had to evolve a shell-cracking face just to avoid starvation.
That's evolution at work. And once you possess the bite force and dental architecture required to shatter a solid bone-like turtle shell, well, biting through the skull of a mammal is relatively effortless.
Oh, right. It's overkill at that point.
Exactly. The trait seamlessly transferred over to their mammalian hunts, making them the most lethally efficient ambush predators in the jungle.
That is incredible. But, to use a close-range ambush weapon like that, you need the perfect environment to hide in.
You do.
Which brings us out of the mechanics of the jaw and into the shadows of the forest and, well, maybe the most surprising part for me, straight into the water.
Yeah, you usually picture cats as having this innate, absolute hatred of water.
Right. My cat hates the bath.
But the jaguar actively seeks it out. They are undisputed masters of the waterways.
They are phenomenal swimmers. Researchers have tracked them swimming at least 1.3 kilometers just moving between islands. And it's not some panic doggy paddle either.
No, it's a purposeful patrol. They don't just swim to commute, They use the rivers as hunting grounds.
Wow.
They will silently glide through the water to ambush capybaras on the riverbank, and they regularly hunt aquatic apex predators.
Like, they hunt the predators.
Oh, yeah. They will leap from a bank directly into a river to wrestle a caiman or dive in to hunt green anacondas.
Wrestling a giant anaconda in its own element is just wild to me. And their raw power doesn't vanish once they pull themselves onto the muddy bank, does it?
None at all.
There are documented accounts of a jaguar dragging a full-grown cow carcass up into the branches of a tree just to keep its meal safe from rising floodwaters.
It perfectly illustrates their dominance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they own the forest floor, they own the canopy, and they own the rivers.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, though. When we talk about their environment and the shadows of the jungle, we have to talk about black panthers.
Oh, yes. The famous black panther.
Growing up, I always thought a black panther was a completely separate, exotic species of cat.
Most people do.
But a black panther in the Americas is actually just a melanistic jaguar.
That's right. Melanism in jaguars is just a naturally occurring color morph. It's driven by genetics. Specifically, it's a dominant gene.
Okay, so a dominant gene.
Yeah, that means if a jaguar cub inherits just one copy of the mutation from either its mother or its father, it's going to have a black coat. They aren't a different species at all.
That's so cool.
In fact, if you catch a black jaguar under the right angle of sunlight, you can actually still see those iconic rosettes hidden deep within the black fur.
Okay, but if this black coat is a dominant gene and it provides this incredibly stealthy camouflage in the pitch black rainforest at night,
Right.
why haven't all jaguars just turned black over time? I mean, why is the spotted version still the default?
It comes down to the sheer diversity of the landscapes they inhabit.
Okay.
The spotted rosette pattern is actually the vastly superior camouflage in open, patchy, sun-dappled environments. Think of the vast Pantanal wetlands or dry, tall grasslands.
Ah, so the spots mimic the dappled sunlight filtering through leaves and tall grass.
Exactly. The black morph, on the other hand, thrives specifically in very dense, dark tropical rainforests.
Makes sense.
In those Pacific jungles, you have an incredibly high density of vegetation where intense bright illumination meets deep, impenetrable shadows. The black coat is a highly specialized adaptation for that specific lighting extreme.
Oh, wow.
So they are far more successful in the deep, dark jungle, but they stick out like a sore thumb in open plains. Because the jaguar inhabits both types of environments across the continent, nature keeps both options active in the genetic pool.
And that incredibly specialized camouflage, whether you're a spotted cat blending into the sunlit reeds or a black cat melting into the jungle shadows, is exactly why the jaguar was able to conquer almost an entire hemisphere.
Very true.
They didn't just adapt to one specific microclimate, they adapted to all of them.
Their historical range is genuinely staggering. Jaguars originally evolved from a Eurasian ancestor. During the Pleistocene, that same ice age period we talked about earlier, they crossed over into the Americas via the Bering Strait land bridge.
And once they crossed over, they spread everywhere. Historically, their empire covered 19 million square kilometers.
It was massive.
In the 19th century, jaguars weren't just in the Amazon. They were living as far north as Monterey, California, and prowling through the mountains of Colorado.
They were a deeply entrenched, highly successful North American species for a very long time.
But you look at the map today, and it's like watching a sprawling ancient empire being systematically dismantled.
Yeah, it's pretty tragic.
They've been pushed further and further south until they're essentially backed into a final stronghold. By the late 1960s, breeding populations were completely wiped out from the United States.
Gone.
In just the last century, their entire global range has shrunk by an estimated 55%. Today, you mostly just get the occasional lone male wandering across the border into the American Southwest. Like one famous jaguar they tracked living in the San Rita Mountains of Arizona.
Right, El Jefe.
Yeah, but the established populations in the U.S. are just gone. Their kingdom is now largely confined to the Amazon basin.
And what's crucial to understand is that this massive retreat wasn't just caused by humans actively shooting them. It's largely about how human-altered landscapes fundamentally shift the balance of power within the food web.
Wait, how does human development change the hierarchy?
Think about the relationship between the jaguar and the cougar, which you might know as a puma or mountain lion.
Oh, sure.
In areas where their territories overlap, you would logically assume the massive, skull-crushing jaguar would completely dominate the smaller cougar.
I mean, yeah, obviously.
But the moment humans disturb a habitat, the cougar actually gains a massive survival advantage.
Why? Just because they're smaller and can hide better?
Because of the math of their metabolism. Cougars are highly adaptable and can survive perfectly well hunting small to medium prey, animals weighing anywhere from 2 to 22 kilograms. Jaguars, because of their sheer mass and the enormous energy required to power those muscles and jaws, rely heavily on huge prey to survive. When human development, like logging or farming, encroaches on a forest, the very first animals to flee or be hunted out are the large prey species.
So the cougar just shrugs and starts eating smaller mammals, but the jaguar is left starving.
Precisely. They become incredibly vulnerable to even minor habitat degradation because their energy demands are so inflexible.
We take away the large prey, we essentially starve out the empire.
Exactly.
But it's fascinating because historically, the humans who shared this massive range with the jaguar didn't just compete with them for resources, they practically worshipped them. Ancient humans built entire civilizations and complex belief systems around the sheer power of this animal.
The cultural impact of the jaguar in the pre-Columbian Americas really cannot be overstated. It wasn't just an animal to them. It was the ultimate symbol of power, martial strength, and the unpredictable, untamed forces of nature.
The mythology is incredible. The ancient Olmec civilization, which is one of the earliest major societies in Mesoamerica, created these fascinating rare jaguar sculptures.
Those are amazing to see.
Yeah, they depicted supernatural beings blending human faces with jaguar fangs and features.
Right.
Later on, the Maya revered the jaguar, which they called the Balam, as a powerful entity that could cross between worlds. They associated it with the underworld, the night sun, and their highest-ranking royalty.
The kings of the jungle and the kings of the cities.
Exactly. And the Aztecs took it even further. They considered the jaguar, or ocelotl, the absolute king of animals. They even maintained an elite, highly feared military caste known as the Jaguar Warriors.
Oh, right.
These soldiers would literally go into battle wearing the skins and heads of jaguars to absorb their courage and strike terror into their enemies.
For those civilizations, the jaguar was the central anchor of the natural world. If the jaguar thrived, the world was in balance. And interestingly enough, modern ecology essentially agrees with that ancient worldview. They just use different terminology.
How's that?
Well, ecologists often categorize the jaguar as a keystone species.
Right, the keystone concept. The idea is that as an apex predator, they control the population levels of large herbivores.
Correct.
Without the jaguar, those herbivores would multiply out of control, overgraze the vegetation, and literally eat the forest until it collapses.
That's the theory.
But looking at the broader ecological research, that keystone consensus isn't exactly bulletproof, is it?
No, it's not a universal consensus. The science is always evolving. Some field biologists argue that the massive population fluctuations we see in jungle prey species might actually just be natural variability.
Like what?
They might be driven by seasonal climate changes, disease, or resource availability, rather than strictly top-down control by the jaws of the jaguar. So the keystone label is, well, it's hotly debated.
So if they aren't definitively the keystone holding the entire food web together, does that make them less ecologically important to conserve?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, their conservation importance doesn't drop a single degree. Because regardless of the keystone debate, the jaguar is indisputably what biologists call an umbrella species.
Break down the umbrella concept for me.
An umbrella species is an animal that naturally requires a massive, unbroken, pristine tract of habitat just to survive and maintain its territory.
Because they need so much food.
Right. Because a single jaguar needs such an enormous home range to find enough large prey, when conservationists work to protect the thousands of acres necessary to save a single jaguar population, they are automatically throwing a protective umbrella over the entire ecosystem.
That makes a lot of sense.
By protecting the habitat of this one cat, we are incidentally securing the homes of about 1,500 other mammal species, countless birds, and highly sensitive endemic amphibians that share that exact same patch of jungle.
So you protect the king, and you inadvertently protect the entire kingdom.
Exactly. You secure the apex, and everything underneath it flourishes.
But right now, protecting that kingdom is a massive challenge. You cannot protect the umbrella if the forest is being chopped down and the cat is being actively hunted.
No, you can't.
The modern threats facing the jaguar are incredibly severe. They are currently listed globally as near threatened.
And the main drivers of that decline are a perfect storm of human conflict. There is massive habitat fragmentation due to agriculture. There are retaliatory killings by cattle ranchers.
Right, who shoot the jaguars for eating livestock when the cat's wild prey has been wiped out.
Exactly.
And there's also a booming illegal wildlife trade that completely shocked me. Between 2014 and early 2019, in the country of Bolivia alone, authorities intercepted and seized 760 jaguar fangs.
That's devastating.
And those fangs were destined for the illegal wildlife market in China, mostly to be sold as jewelry or status symbols.
It is a tragic commodification of a spectacular animal. But the conservation community is fighting back, and they are doing it with highly coordinated international strategy. It heavily relies on the establishment of what are called Jaguar Conservation Units, or JCUs.
There are currently 51 of these JCUs mapped out across 36 geographic regions, creating a chain from Mexico all the way down to Argentina. So what does this all mean for you trying to visualize this strategy?
It's a good question.
Think of these conservation units like small, isolated towns that are completely surrounded by a rising sea of hostile development. Highways, soy farms, cattle ranches, they are safe havens, but they are totally cut off. And if those towns remain isolated, nobody new can ever come in.
And in biological terms, isolation is a death sentence.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. If jaguars are trapped in these disconnected JCUs, the gene pool begins to shrink. They suffer from genetic bottlenecking, which leads to inbreeding, susceptibility to disease, lower birth weights, and eventually the local population quietly dies out.
Wow.
This is why the entire modern strategy hinges on the creation and protection of wildlife corridors.
These corridors are the roads connecting those isolated towns. They are designated pathways of wild protected land that allow a young, dispersing male jaguar to travel safely from one JCU to another.
Right.
It lets them find a new mate, mix the gene pool, and keep the population healthy and resilient. They aren't just patches of grass. They are vital genetic lifelines.
But this raises an important question, because maintaining these lifelines isn't just a matter of drawing green lines on a map and walking away. These corridors inevitably cut straight through human-dominated landscapes.
Right. A jaguar traveling 50 miles between two conservation units is going to cross highways and walk through people's backyards and ranches. So conservation isn't really about managing cats. It's about managing people.
Entirely. It requires deep, ongoing cooperation with the humans living in the jaguar's path. It means actively educating local ranchers on better livestock management techniques to prevent retaliatory shootings.
Yeah.
It means engineering and funding massive highway underpasses so the cats aren't struck by traffic. And it means deploying law enforcement to dismantle the international smuggling networks that exploit local poverty to harvest those things. It is a deeply complex, incredibly human challenge.
It really is. We've covered a staggering amount of ground today.
I really have.
We started by exploring the mechanics of a terrifying 5,000 Newton bite that evolved specifically to shatter the shells of giant turtles. We followed the jaguar into the water to hunt anacondas and decoded the genetic secret behind the Black Panther's jungle camouflage.
The ultimate survivors.
We looked at how Aztec warriors revered them as gods and how modern humans are now desperately trying to engineer genetic lifelines just to keep them from disappearing.
It's a profound shift in their story. They have gone from being the untouchable mythological architects of the ecosystem to a species that is heavily dependent on human empathy, planning, and intervention.
You now have a deep, multifaceted understanding of one of nature's most perfect, powerful predators, saving you hours of reading. But before we wrap up, there's one final thought we want to leave you with.
We discussed how the jaguar's immensely powerful jaw was an evolutionary leap, driven entirely by the post-Pleistocene extinctions. It was nature's drastic answer to a rapidly changing world.
Right.
Today, the age of humans, the Anthropocene, is pushing the jaguar into increasingly fragmented, isolated territories. We are fundamentally altering its habitat and its prey, which leaves us with a lingering, provocative question. What unseen, drastic evolutionary adaptations might we be forcing onto this apex predator today?
If the biological can opener was a jaguar's answer to the end of the Ice Age, what is its answer going to be to us? Definitely something to think about. We'll catch you on the next deep dive. You are staring at today's stack of sources, right? We have this massive, comprehensive Wikipedia deep dive on the history of nihilism, along with a towering pile of philosophical essays.
Yeah, historical analyses and even some highly technical medical trial data.
It is a lot, I know. And you're probably picturing a very specific cliche right now. We all know.
Oh, totally. The teenager dressed all in black.
Exactly. Staring moodily out a rain-streaked window, muttering that, nothing matters. Well, today, our mission is to completely demolish that stereotype.
Because it really is just a stereotype.
Right. We are taking the source material and rescuing the concept of nihilism from its reputation as just some temporary, edgy, emotional phase.
Yeah, because when you actually dig into the mechanics of these ideas, you realize this massive philosophical framework touches, well, everything.
It's the foundation of morality, the cutting edge of quantum physics, modern art, and, like you mentioned with the data, the validity of modern medicine.
It's everywhere.
So, okay, let's unpack this. The word itself comes from the Latin nihil, which literally means nothing. But the philosophy of nothing is actually packed with some incredibly complex ideas.
It functions as a family of philosophies, really.
Yeah.
It ruthlessly interrogates the existence of any objectively meaningful purpose or moral value, truth, or even physical reality.
But to understand the mechanism behind it, we have to kind of strip away the modern associations, right?
Exactly. We usually tie nihilism to 18th and 19th century thinkers, like Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi, who coined the term in a philosophical context.
Right, or Ivan Turgenev, who popularized it in literature.
Yeah, but the DNA of this skepticism is actually ancient, like really ancient.
We're talking ancient Greek skeptics, right?
Them, yes, but also if you look at the Ajna school in 6th century BCE India, they didn't just doubt knowledge.
Wait, what did they do?
They theorized that the pursuit of knowledge was structurally flawed and actively hindered salvation.
Oh, wow. So just trying to learn was the problem.
Basically, yeah. And early Buddhist thought similarly analyzed the pervasiveness of suffering by, pointing to the fundamental emptiness of inherent existence in all things.
Mm-hmm.
Humanity has been trying to mechanically deconstruct its own reality for a very, very long time.
Which brings us to the flavor of deconstruction you, listening right now, have most likely wrestled with during, a late-night existential crisis.
Existential nihilism.
Right. The assertion that life has absolutely no objective meaning or higher purpose. I always picture this, and I think about this a lot, like having a massive 1,000-piece IKEA furniture set delivered to your living room.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You open the cardboard, you dump out all the wood and the screws, but there are absolutely no instructions.
None at all.
Worse, there's no picture on the box. You have all the raw materials of a life, but the universe just refuses to tell you what you were supposed to be building.
It's a great analogy.
So what do? Do you sit on the floor in despair, or do you start gluing dowels together to make some weird modern art sculpture?
See, the way you approach that pile of wood perfectly mirrors the historical divide among existential thinkers.
How so?
Well, When faced with the absurd, which is that massive tension between the human brain's desperate biological need for pattern and meaning, and the cold, silent indifference of the universe, different philosophers engineered completely different survival mechanisms.
Okay, so give me an example. What did Arthur Schopenhauer do with the IKEA pieces?
Schopenhauer looked at that meaningless pile and theorized that life was driven by a blind, irrational force he called the will.
The will.
Right.
Yeah.
And because this will is constantly striving and never actually satisfied, it pretty much guarantees suffering. So his mechanical solution was ascetic detachment.
Ascetic detachment, meaning what exactly?
By renouncing our desires, we essentially starve the will.
So you walk away from the IKEA pieces entirely, you just refuse to play a rigged game?
Exactly. But then you have Jean-Paul Sartre, who engineered the exact opposite mechanism.
Right, the French existentialist.
Yeah. He argued that because there is no predefined essence, no picture on the box, to use your analogy, we are condemned to be free.
Condemned to be free. That's a heavy way to put it.
It is, but it means the absence of universal meaning forces radical freedom upon us, meaning we are entirely responsible for inventing our own values through action.
Okay, so Sartre starts building the weird sculpture. What about Albert Camus?
Camus tackled it from yet another angle. He believed you can't resolve the absurd, but you shouldn't surrender to it either.
So no giving up.
No. He advocated for a defiant, rebellious affirmation of life. You push the boulder up the hill knowing it will roll back down, and you find joy in the rebellion itself.
And then Friedrich Nietzsche took this a step further, right, by sort of weaponizing the lack of meaning.
Oh, absolutely. He is the one who categorized nihilism into passive and active states.
Right, and passive nihilism is the cliche we started with today. The quiet resignation, the lack of motivation, that desperate clinging to old dogmas because you were terrified of the void.
Exactly. But active nihilism is entirely different.
It used the realization that nothing matters objectively as a creative sledgehammer. You actively destroy the old, rotting societal rules to clear the foundation so you can enthusiastically build your own value system.
And that sledgehammer swings hardest when we apply it to morality. If we connect this to the bigger picture, when active nihilism bleeds into ethics, we get moral nihilism, or error theory.
Error theory. I saw that in the sources. The philosopher J.L. Mackie famously outlined this, right?
He did. He pointed out the mechanics of moral language. When humans say murder is wrong, we are framing wrongness as an objective feature of the universe.
Like we act as if wrongness is a physical property, like mass or velocity or electromagnetism.
Right. But moral nihilists point out that you can't put an action under a microscope and isolate its wrongness particles.
Right. There are no wrongness particles.
Exactly. Moral properties are strange because they don't merely describe the physical world. They demand that you act a certain way. They possess an inherent to-be-doneness.
That's a great term. To be doneness.
Moral nihilism argues that the physical universe simply does not contain prescriptive commands. Our feelings of right and wrong are just evolutionary heuristics.
So just social programming.
Yeah, designed by natural selection to keep tribal apes cooperating long enough to reproduce. It strips away the illusion of cosmic justice.
So if moral facts are just biological illusions, the entire framework of permission or prohibition just evaporates.
Pretty much. You aren't adhering to a universal law when you act ethically. You are simply conforming to a highly developed herd instinct.
Wow. But if our moral judgments are just biological illusions designed to keep us alive, it forces a much more uncomfortable question.
Which is?
Can we even trust the biological hardware that is processing this reality? I mean, if the brain lies to us about morality, how do we know it isn't lying to us about literally everything else?
And this drops us straight into epistemological nihilism. We are moving from questioning human concepts to questioning the mechanics of knowledge itself.
Because epistemological nihilism challenges the idea that truth can even be attained, right?
Right. There is the softer approach, relativism, which argues that truth is entirely dependent on localized, subjective frameworks.
Like my truth versus your truth.
Exactly. But the radical skeptic takes a much more aggressive stance. They deny that knowledge can exist at all. They attack the very foundational mechanisms we use to gather data.
This is where René Descartes and his famous dream argument enter the source material.
A classic.
Yeah, Descartes forces you to realize that when you are in a vivid dream, your brain perfectly simulates physical reality. You feel texture, you see light, you experience fear.
It feels completely real.
Right. So the radical skeptic uses this biological glitch to argue a terrifying point. Since you cannot definitively mathematically prove that your brain isn't simulating reality right this very second, you cannot claim to actually know a single thing about the physical world around you.
They systematically destabilize your confidence in your own sensory inputs,
Hmm.
and they don't stop at the senses either. They attack logic itself using the criterion problem.
The chicken or the egg thing.
Yes. To judge whether any piece of data counts as true knowledge, you need a standard, a criterion, to measure it against. But how do you verify that your criterion is actually accurate?
You would need a prior piece of verified knowledge to test the criterion.
Exactly. It's a closed-loop system.
It's like a computer trying to verify its own operating system by running a diagnostic program that is built into the exact same operating system. If the OS is corrupted, the diagnostic test is corrupted too. You can never step outside the system to objectively measure it.
It's the infinite regressive validation. Because you can never find an uncorrupted objective starting point, the radical skeptic concludes that the entire pursuit of knowledge is structurally impossible.
Okay, I have to jump in here and throw a massive wrench into this logic.
Good point.
If a radical skeptic stands on a podium and claims absolutely no knowledge exists, aren't they making a definitive knowledge claim?
Yep.
They are stating as a fact that they know that they don't know anything. The entire premise seems totally self-refuting.
And you are entirely right. The self-refuting nature of the claim is exactly why you rarely find a working philosopher who genuinely subscribes to radical skepticism.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it is logically incoherent to confidently state that no confident statements can be made. In academic philosophy, radical skepticism functions almost exclusively as a thought experiment.
So it's just a tool.
It's the ultimate stress test. Thinkers use it as an obstacle course to prove the robustness of their own positive theories about knowledge.
It's the philosophical equivalent of a crash test dummy.
That's a perfect way to put it. But our sources highlight a branch of nihilism that isn't just a thought experiment. It actually has practical utility in solving historical logic puzzles.
Mereological nihilism.
Yes, the metaphysical view that composite objects made of smaller, distinct parts, simply do not exist.
The mechanism behind this relies on a ruthless application of Occam's razor, right?
Exactly. The principle dictates that the scientific or philosophical explanation requiring the fewest assumptions is usually the correct one.
So, take a look at the room around you. You perceive tables, chairs, maybe a laptop. Mereological nihilism argues that human consciousness is arbitrarily drawing boundaries around clumps of matter and labeling them.
Because in reality, physics tells us there are only simple elementary particles.
So if I'm looking at a table, I'm not actually seeing a single unified object called a table. I am looking at billions of elementary particles that just happen to be arranged table-wise at this specific moment in time.
Right. And by mathematically reducing reality only to its most fundamental building blocks, you eliminate a massive amount of metaphysical clutter.
Clutter like what?
Well, we don't need to explain how a group of particles magically transforms into a chair once assembled, because the chair is just a linguistic convenience. It doesn't physically exist.
Okay, assuming everyone listening is familiar with the ancient ship of Theseus paradox, where you replace the wooden planks of a ship one by one over years until no original pieces remain, and philosophers agonize over whether it's still the same ship.
Mereological nihilism just aggressively deletes the problem.
Yeah. The nihilist steps into the debate and points out that there was never a ship to begin with. There were only particles arranged shipwise. Now, there are different particles arranged shipwise.
The human concept of the ship is what caused the paradox, not the physical reality. It acts as an incredibly efficient philosophical scalpel.
It really does, but we have to transition from the realm of abstract logic and quantum mechanics to the terrifying reality of what happens when these scalpels are handed to the general public.
Yeah, things get messy.
Because when these philosophies escape academia and infect politics, art, and society, the results are highly volatile. The historical blueprint for this is 19th century Russia, the birthplace of political nihilism.
And we have to look at the pressure cooker of that specific environment. You had the Tsarist regime enforcing a rigid, oppressive, authoritarian social structure.
Right. Serfdom, extreme poverty, and just an absolute lack of social mobility created this totally inflexible system.
And out of that immense pressure, a movement of Russian youth decided that if the system couldn't be reformed, it had to be eradicated. They rejected the entire architecture of Russian society.
Everything.
Everything. Religion, traditional family structures, aesthetics, and political institutions were all classified as worthless instruments of oppression.
And the intellectual spark for this was largely literary, according to the deep dive sources.
Yes, they adopted the cold, purely scientific rationalism of characters like Bazarov from Turgenev's novel Fathers and Sons.
Oh, Bazarov, he viewed human emotions and societal norms as, like, biological absurdities.
Exactly. And the real-world movement took that fictional rationalism and weaponized it.
They took Nietzsche's sledgehammer, but forgot the second step. I mean, Nietzsche wanted to burn down old values, specifically to fertilize the soil for new, vibrant growth.
But the Russian political nihilists, figures like Sergei Nechayev, who wrote the Catechism of a Revolutionary, they just wanted to burn down the forest and walk away.
Their doctrine was pure destruction. They resorted to terrorism, arson, and the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, all without drafting a single blueprint for what the new society should actually look like.
Which is terrifying.
So how do we identify the boundary where questioning a system stops being a liberating force and turns into a purely destructive contagion?
The boundary really lies in the intent behind the deconstruction. Political nihilism aimed for the physical annihilation of the state. But when the exact same destructive impulse is channeled into culture and art, it functions as a profound societal mirror.
Consider the Dadaism movement, which erupted immediately following the mechanized slaughter of the First World War.
The cultural trauma of watching millions of people die in trenches for essentially no rational reason.
Right. The Dadaists looked at the carnage and realized that the established moral, scientific, and artistic standards of the Enlightenment had marched society directly into a meat grinder.
Rationalism had created mustard gas and machine guns.
So in response, they deployed cultural nihilism. They rejected the very concept of artistic standards, embracing chaos, irrationality, and anti-bourgeois nonsense.
And the defining moment of this in our source material is Marcel Duchamp's fountain.
Oh, man. In 1917, he submitted a standard, ready-made porcelain urinal to an art exhibition, signed with a fake name.
It's iconic. And it wasn't just a prank, right? It was a mechanical interrogation of the system.
He was forcing the art world to confront its own arbitrary rules. He was effectively saying, you want to debate the refined rules of good taste and aesthetic beauty while the world is busy destroying itself. Here is a urinal.
Exactly. By embracing the absurd, Dadaism forces the audience to justify their institutions rather than blindly accepting them as inherent truths. And you see this mechanism operating constantly in modern narrative forms, too.
Like in literature and movies.
Yeah. Dostoevsky used nihilistic characters in The Brothers Karamazov to run simulations on what happens to human psychology when the moral authority of God is removed.
Or Samuel Beckett's plays. They strip away plot and setting to force the audience to confront the raw terror, and sometimes the comedy, of sheer nothingness. It's a thread that runs straight into modern pop culture. When you watch Fight Club deconstruct consumer identity, or Patrick Bateman in American Psycho reveal the hollow, meaningless core of 1980s corporate greed, you are watching active nihilism interrogate societal structures.
And this systemic skepticism isn't limited to the humanities either. It has penetrated modern empirical science through a framework known as therapeutic nihilism, or medical nihilism.
This was honestly the most jarring part of our research, applying nihilism to the medical industry. The core argument here is that the vast majority of medical interventions are largely ineffective.
And that we have a completely distorted view of medical progress.
Now, the mechanism of medical nihilism doesn't argue that biology is fake or that science is useless, right?
No, not at all. Instead, it applies extreme skepticism to the methodologies used to gather medical knowledge. The proponents argue that the modern clinical trial system is fundamentally compromised by structural flaws and financial incentives.
Right. They point to practices like p-hacking.
Yes. P-hacking is where researchers manipulate statistical data until they find a seemingly significant pattern. And they also point to publication bias, where journals only publish successful trials and just, bury the failures.
I have to push back on the danger of this framework, though. It's one thing to say a porcelain urinal is art, but swinging Nietzsche's sledgehammer at the pharmaceutical industry seems incredibly risky.
It is risky.
If we adopt radical skepticism toward medical trials, don't we risk ignoring life-saving treatments just because the statistical modeling isn't flawless?
That is the perpetual danger of the nihilistic toolset. If applied too broadly, it paralyzes action completely. However, the medical nihilist would counter-argue that the current system is already paralyzing us with false confidence. By systematically overestimating the benefits of new drugs and underestimating their toxic side effects, the medical establishment acts with unwarranted hubris.
So therapeutic nihilism demands a return to extreme caution, suggesting we should default to non-intervention unless the evidence of benefit is overwhelmingly, irrefutably massive.
Exactly. It is the refusal to take the progress of institutional medicine on blind faith.
Wow. We have dragged you through a staggering amount of intellectual terrain today, from ancient Indian skepticism to the evolutionary illusions of morality to Russian assassins and the statistical manipulation of clinical trials.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
But let's ground this directly into your daily life, because even if you don't use the academic terminology, you are brushing up against these exact mechanisms all the time.
You experience it when you are hit with a wave of profound alienation while, say, scrolling through a fragmented, chaotic 24-hour news cycle.
Or doom scrolling on social media.
Yeah. You experience it when you look up at the James Webb Space Telescope images, realize the incomprehensible vastness of the galaxies, and feel your own ego shrink into absolute insignificance.
That specific feeling has a name. It's cosmic nihilism. The 19th century philosopher Max Stirner described the universe as metaphysical chaos, a reality completely devoid of a built-in, comforting structure of objective meanings.
It can feel like drowning in the void.
It really can. But the crucial takeaway from this deep dive, the thread connecting Schopenhauer, Sartre, Camus, and Nietzsche, is that recognizing the metaphysical chaos is only the first step.
The realization of the void is not a mandate for despair.
The universe refusing to hand you an instruction manual is the ultimate invitation. Realizing that morality isn't a physical law and that society's rules are just improvised, temporary structures removes the crushing burden of cosmic expectation.
It frees you.
It gives you the clearance to engage in active nihilism, to take the raw IKEA pieces of your life and consciously, enthusiastically build your own meaning.
You become the architect of your own value system, precisely because no one else is coming to build it for you.
Which brings me to one final, mind-bending mechanical thought experiment I want to leave you with today. If you take all of this seriously and you successfully embrace mereological nihilism, the metaphysical proof that composite objects do not exist, that means you do not exist.
Not as a cohesive, persistent, single identity.
Right. The person you think you are is just a temporary, fleeting collection of elementary particles currently arranged you-wise. So does realizing that your identity is a biological fiction free you from the heavy burden of your own ego, your past traumas, and your regrets?
Or does it make every choice you ever make completely irrelevant?
Think about that next time you pull up a collection of particles arranged chair-wise and sit down at a collection of particles arranged table-wise.
So if you step outside on a clear winter night and you look up toward the constellation Taurus, you'll see this tiny glittering cluster of stars.
Yeah, it's a very distinct little grouping, like a tiny dipper.
Exactly. And if your eyesight is fairly good, you will clearly count 6 stars.
Just 6.
Right. But here is the wild part. For tens of thousands of years, almost every isolated ancient civilization on Earth looked up at that exact same 6-star cluster. And they told a mythological story about 7 sisters.
Yeah, it's always 7.
Right. And one sister is always missing. So today, we're figuring out why.
It's really one of the most compelling mysteries in cultural astronomy. I mean, it blends astrophysics with ancient human oral tradition in a way you just rarely see.
And that is exactly what we are exploring today. You are looking at the Pleiades, or Messier 45. Today's deep dive takes us through a really comprehensive Wikipedia article that maps out the astronomical, the historical, and, well, the cultural footprint of this specific star cluster.
It's a massive topic.
It is. Our mission here is to trace how a single group of young blue stars, which are just over 400 light years away, managed to act as this ultimate ancient global sky clock.
And spark a huge controversy in modern astrophysics, too.
Yes, that too. And somehow unite human storytelling across oceans and millennia.
You know, the sheer geographic spread of Pleiades mythology is really what makes this so unusual. We are looking at a shared human phenomenon that existed long, long before any concept of global communication.
Yeah, let's look at the map from our sources here because it's staggering. You have the Celts in ancient Europe calling them the Torardos, and then you cross the world to the pre-colonial Filipinos who actually used them to mark the beginning of their year.
Right, and if you look out into the Pacific, the Hawaiians know them as Makali, while the Maori in New Zealand, they celebrate their rising as Matariki.
Oh, right, Matariki. And then you jump over to the Americas,
Mhm.
the Maya, the Aztec, the Quechua down in the Andes, various North American tribes like the Sioux and the Cherokee. They all had highly specific, deeply ingrained traditions for this one tiny patch of sky.
It really did.
It kind of forces the question, right? It was essentially the universe's most successful global branding campaign. Why did humans everywhere, completely isolated from one another by these impenetrable oceans and continents, all fixate on the exact same tiny patch of sky and invent stories about, like, sisters?
Well, it really comes down to the mechanics of human biology intersecting with the cosmos.
Oh, so.
So we are deeply wired to seek out patterns. That's just how our brains work. When early humans looked up, the night sky was, overwhelmingly chaotic. It's just a random scattering of luminous points.
Just noise, essentially.
Exactly. But the Pleiades feature this striking visual density. It's a tight, bright little knot of stars that naturally interrupts all that chaos. It just commands the human eye.
So it's a visual anomaly, and we feel this need to explain anomaly.
Yes, precisely.
But that doesn't really explain the storytelling aspect, right? Why do so many completely different cultures personify them as a family, and specifically as sisters?
That points to how we process social information. A close-knit group of objects in the sky naturally translates into a close-knit group of figures in our narratives.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, a family is just the most intuitive human structure to map onto a tight cluster.
Which brings us back to that mathematical mystery I mentioned at the very start. So in Greek mythology, they are the 7 daughters of the Titan Atlas and the sea nymph Pleione.
Right, the 7 sisters.
And almost universally, the global myths focus on 7 characters.
Mhm.
But practically speaking, like we said, the naked eye only clearly sees 6.
Yeah, the famous lost sister phenomenon.
Right.
And what's fascinating is the myths almost always feature a built-in explanation for that discrepancy. Like one sister hides her face in shame, or she marries a mortal, or she's just lost to the darkness.
And the sources outline a really fascinating scientific theory for this, don't they?
They do, yeah. It's really cool. If we wind the cosmic clock back, say, about 100,000 years, the star named Pleione was physically further away from the star Atlas.
Okay.
So, to the unaided eye of early hunter-gatherers, Pleione would have been much easier to see as a completely distinct, separate 7th star.
Wait, really? 100,000 years ago?
Yeah. Consider the implications of that timeline. It suggests that the core of this widespread mythological story might not just be a poetic invention.
You're saying it's an actual memory?
Exactly. It could be an observed astronomical reality. Early humans saw 7 stars, encoded that into a story, and managed to pass that specific detail down through tens of thousands of years of oral tradition.
Even as that 7th star slowly drifted and merged into the glare of the others, that is an incredible intersection of folklore and orbital mechanics.
It really is, and their cultural momentum never really stopped either.
No, it didn't. Take Japan, for instance. Their 8th century records refer to the cluster as Mutsuraboshi, which means 6 stars. But in modern times, they are known by a word derived from a verb that means to cluster together. And that word is Subaru.
Yeah, a detail perfectly preserved in modern commerce.
Right. When several smaller Japanese companies merged to form a larger automotive corporation, they adopted that name and its 6-star logo.
It is wild to think that people are out there commuting to work with a Bronze Age astronomical reference sitting right on their steering wheel.
Totally wild. But, these stars weren't just characters in a story or modern corporate branding. They served a highly vital, practical function.
Absolutely. They were one of humanity's first pieces of essential technology. They were an ancient sky clock.
Yeah, the sources detail the Nebra sky disk, which is this artifact found in Germany dating back to roughly 1600 BC.
It's a beautiful piece.
It is. It's a bronze disk inlaid with gold symbols. You have the sun, the moon, and right between them in a very prominent position is a cluster of 7 gold dots representing the Pleiades.
And you have to ask, why did a Bronze Age society take the time and resources to forge this specific star cluster in gold?
Right, why them?
Well, because around the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, specifically around 2330 BC, the Pleiades served as the marker for the vernal equinox. They signaled the start of spring.
And for an early agricultural society, that isn't just trivia.
No, it's survival. Knowing exactly when the seasons turn dictates when you plant your crops. Misjudging that transition could literally lead to famine.
So the mechanical precision was vital.
Right. The heliacal rising of the Pleiades, which is the day they first become visible above the eastern horizon just before sunrise, acted as a cosmic starting gun for the agricultural year.
And it extended well beyond farming, too. In ancient Greek, the very name Pleiades is believed to derive from the word plain, which means to sail. Because their rising marked the safe opening of the Mediterranean sailing season. And we see similar functional uses codified elsewhere.
Yeah, in early Mesopotamian treatises where they start the star lists, and in the ancient Hindu Atharva Veda compiled around 1200 BC, where they formed the first lunar station to mark the new year.
They provided the structural baseline for ancient Arabic calendars as well. But I actually need to interject here, because the sources mention a celestial mechanic that really complicates this perfect timeline.
You're talking about precession.
Yes, precession. Over thousands of years, the Earth wobbles on its axis.
Right. Think of a spinning top on a table. As it spins, the stem of the top doesn't stay perfectly vertical, right? It slowly traces a circle in the air.
Yeah, I can picture that.
The Earth does the exact same thing, just over a cycle of about 26,000 years.
So because the Earth is wobbling, our vantage point from the surface changes. The background stars appear to slowly shift position over the centuries.
Exactly.
And meaning, eventually, the Pleiades stopped perfectly marking the vernal equinox. The math no longer lined up.
It drifted out of sync.
So if they were strictly a practical tool, why didn't ancient astronomers immediately discard them when the seasons drifted? Why keep using a broken clock?
Well, you are identifying the tension between scientific utility and cultural momentum. By the time the Earth's wobble shifted the stars enough to be problematic for agriculture, the Pleiades had become deeply embedded in human society.
Like beyond just planting seeds.
Right. They were tied to religious rituals, generational traditions, and cultural identity.
So human tradition essentially outlasted the scientific reality. The math changed, but people refused to update their calendars because they liked the story too much.
Exactly. The symbolic power carried them forward. They remained the cultural vernal point long after they ceased to be the mathematical one.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
And it sets up our next major transition perfectly, because for millennia, our relationship with the Pleiades was defined by the limits of human eyesight. But that changes dramatically when we start shifting our perception of scale.
Yes, the telescope.
Right. In the winter of 1610, Galileo points his newly invented telescope at this mythical cluster.
And he completely shatters the illusion of the 6 or 7 sisters.
What does he see?
His sketches from that observation reveal 36 distinct stars. He proves that human eyes had only been picking up the brightest peaks of a much larger, much denser population.
So Galileo proves our eyes were lying. But even with early telescopes, scientists had a fundamental question, right? Were these stars actually a family? Or was it just a trick of perspective?
Right, the optical illusion question.
Yeah, could it be like looking at two distant streetlights that appear close together, even though one is actually miles behind the other?
To solve that, they had to move beyond optical tools and into mathematics. In 1767, an English clergyman and scientist named John Michell approached the problem using probability.
Which was a big deal, because before Michell, the general assumption was that stars were just scattered arbitrarily across the void, like paint splattered on a canvas.
Just totally random.
Right. So Michell runs the numbers on the Pleiades. He calculates the mathematical odds of these specific bright stars aligning in such a tight visual group entirely by random chance.
And his result was 1 in 500,000.
Wow. So he statistically proves they are a physically related family bound together in space.
Yeah.
They aren't an optical illusion.
Yes, they are a true physical cluster.
And this scientific progress brings us to 1771 and the famous French astronomer Charles Messier.
Ah, Messier.
Yes. She publishes this renowned catalog of deep sky objects, officially dubbing the Pleiades Messier 45, or M45. But if you read the history in our sources, this is actually an incredibly suspicious catalog entry.
Oh, it is a wonderful historical artifact of academic rivalry.
It really is, because Messier was a comet hunter. His catalog was specifically designed as a do not look at these list.
Yeah.
He wanted to map out faint, blurry objects so other astronomers wouldn't mistakenly think they had discovered a new comet.
And the Pleiades are the exact opposite of faint and blurry. They are glaringly bright and totally impossible to confuse with a comet.
Right. Adding them to the list makes absolutely no scientific sense.
None.
But Messier had a rival, Nicolas Louis de Lacaille, who had recently published a catalog with 42 objects.
Yeah.
Messier apparently just wanted a longer list.
He was padding his stats.
Exactly. He throws in the Orion Nebula, the Praesepe cluster, and the Pleiades to bump his final count up to 45. It's literally the 18th century equivalent of inflating your social media follower count just for the prestige.
It's such an amusing display of vanity, but the irony is really profound.
How so?
Well, Messier's arbitrary decision permanently branded the cluster as M45, and this bright, obvious object that he just threw in as filler would eventually trigger a massive crisis in modern astrophysics.
Oh, right. The cosmic distance ladder controversy.
Yes.
This is where the deep dive turns into a genuine scientific thriller. To understand the panic here, we first need to understand how astronomers measure distance. You obviously cannot string a tape measure from Earth to another galaxy.
No, you definitely cannot.
So astronomers use a ladder system.
Right. You measure the distance to a close object using direct geometry. Once you have that baseline locked in, you use the known brightness of that nearby object to estimate the distance of things further away.
So rung by rung, you calculate the scale of the universe. And the Pleiades are a foundational rung on that ladder. They are relatively close, and thanks to John Michell, we know they are a related cluster. If we know exactly how far away the Pleiades are, we can confidently measure the cosmos.
Yes. And prior to the 1990s, ground-based measurements provided a solid consensus. The cluster was determined to be approximately 135 parsecs away.
Let's give that number some real-world scale for you listening. A parsec is about 3.26 light years. So 135 parsecs is roughly 440 light years away.
Right.
Which means the light you see when you look up at the Pleiades tonight actually left those stars right around the time Shakespeare was writing his plays.
It's a great way to think about it, and that consensus held perfectly fine until the European Space Agency launched the Hipparcos satellite.
Okay, what was its mission?
Its primary mission was to measure stellar distances from orbit using parallax. This would circumvent all the distortions of Earth's atmosphere.
Let's visualize parallax for a second. If you hold your thumb out at arm's length, close your left eye, and then switch and close your right eye, your thumb appears to jump back and forth against the background of the room.
Right.
That visual shift is parallax. And the Earth does the exact same thing. We take a picture of a star in January, wait 6 months until the Earth is on the opposite side of the sun, and take another picture.
And then we measure how much the star appeared to shift against the deep background galaxies. It is fundamental direct geometry. It is considered completely foolproof.
But the Hipparcos data comes back and just drops a absolute bombshell on the astrophysics community. It states the Pleiades are only 118 parsecs away.
Yeah, they were suddenly 10% closer than anyone thought.
And in astrophysics, a 10% error on a foundational baseline is catastrophic, isn't it?
Oh, it's a nightmare.
But wait, how does a multi-million-dollar satellite simply fail at fundamental geometry? Did someone, carry a 1 instead of a 0 in the programming?
No, it wasn't a simple typo. It was a really subtle, systemic processing flaw. You see, Hipparcos was incredibly accurate for isolated stars. But the Pleiades are a dense cluster.
Ah, okay.
When the satellite scanned that specific crowded field of view, the overlapping signals from so many tight, bright points of light created a micro-error in the satellite's internal measurement algorithms.
So it was a bias unique to tight clusters.
Exactly.
But before they figured that flaw out, panic set in. Because it's like, imagine you're building a house, right? And you realize the tape measure you used to build the first floor is missing an inch. You suddenly have to question the structural integrity of the entire skyscraper.
That's the exact scale of the problem they were facing. The basic laws of stellar evolution were under threat. If the Pleiades were truly 10% closer, the stars in that cluster were significantly less luminous than our foundational physics models dictated.
Which means everything else is wrong too.
Exactly. If the physics models for our closest neighbors were wrong, every subsequent rung on the distance ladder was broken. Estimations for the age, the size, and the evolution of the whole universe would have to be entirely rewritten.
That is a massive headache.
Oh.
So the scientific community scrambled. Our sources show they spent years bringing out the heaviest astronomical artillery available to either verify or debunk the Hipparcos data.
Oh, yeah. They threw everything at it.
They pointed the Hubble Space Telescope at the cluster. They utilized very long baseline interferometry, which is where they link radio telescopes across the globe to create an Earth-sized synthetic antenna.
And later, they analyzed data from the new Gaia satellite.
And what did they find?
Every single one of those independent, highly advanced methods pointed back to the original estimate, roughly 136 parsecs.
Wow. The collective sigh of relief from astrophysicists must have been deafening.
I'm sure it was.
So the Hipparcos data was proven flawed, and the universe remained the size we thought it was.
Yes, thankfully.
So, having mapped out where they are and their amazing cultural history, I think we should look at what the physical reality of the Seven Sisters is today. What is the cluster actually made of?
Well, it is an open cluster dominated by hot, extremely luminous blue stars. And in cosmic terms, they are practically newborns.
Really?
Yeah, the entire cluster formed within the last 100 million years.
Wow. To put that timeline in perspective, the dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago. So when a Tyrannosaurus rex looked up at the night sky, the Pleiades barely existed as a cohesive group.
Right, it's very recent. And alongside those bright blue stars, the cluster hides a massive population of much dimmer objects. Up to 25% of the cluster's population consists of brown dwarfs.
These are objects similar to the famous Tide 1, right?
Yes.
Brown dwarfs are often called failed stars. They have less than 8% of the mass of our sun, meaning they lack the immense gravitational crushing force required to ignite standard hydrogen fusion in their cores.
So they just glow faintly from the heat of their initial formation.
Right, but our sources highlight that these failed stars are actually a vital tool for astronomers to calculate the cluster's age.
They are. They function as a cosmic stopwatch, utilizing the element lithium.
Wait, how does a lack of fusion make them a stopwatch?
Well, lithium is an incredibly fragile element. In standard, massive stars, the internal temperatures are so high that lithium is rapidly destroyed by nuclear reactions shortly after the star forms.
Okay, that makes sense.
But brown dwarfs, lacking that extreme core temperature, retain their original lithium for much longer. So by observing the highest mass brown dwarfs in the Pleiades and checking if they have burned through their lithium yet, astronomers can calculate an incredibly precise boundary for how much time has passed since the cluster formed.
Because we know exactly what temperature and pressure are required to destroy lithium.
Exactly. It's a chemical timer.
That is brilliant. And that gives us the firm age estimate of roughly 115 million years. Now, we have to address the most famous visual feature of the Pleiades. Anyone who has seen a long exposure photograph of M45 knows the image I'm talking about. You have these brilliant blue stars wrapped in a stunning, wispy, glowing blue fog, which is called reflection nebulosity.
It's iconic.
It is. And the intuitive assumption is that this dust is the stellar nursery, right?
Yeah.
Like the leftover gas from which these stars were born. But the sources state that is completely wrong.
Yeah, it is a very persistent misconception, but given the cluster is over 100 million years old, the immense radiation pressure from those young, hot stars would have blown away any residual birth material tens of millions of years ago.
Wait, so this beautiful dust cloud illuminating these stars has absolutely nothing to do with them?
Nothing at all.
Are you serious?
I am. The cluster is currently passing through a completely unrelated, particularly dusty region of the interstellar medium. The stars and the dust are moving along entirely different trajectories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the dust is actually flying past the cluster at roughly 18 kilometers per second.
So it is essentially a cosmic photobomb.
Yes.
Just a random intersection of matter that happens to look incredibly photogenic from our vantage point on Earth.
It's pure serendipity. And, well, it's temporary, too,
Temper.
because the gravitational glue holding an open cluster together is relatively weak.
Right, because the universe is dynamic. Everything is in motion.
Exactly. The Pleiades are currently drifting through space toward the feet of the constellation Orion, but as they travel, the tidal forces of the Milky Way are tearing at them.
And the sources map out a pretty dramatic final act for them. Over the next 250 million years, gravitational encounters with giant molecular clouds, passing stars, and the pull of the galaxy's spiral arms will systematically strip the cluster apart.
Yeah, the Seven Sisters will be physically separated and scattered into the broader background of the Milky Way.
The cluster will just cease to exist.
It will.
Wow. So to look back at the journey we've taken today, we started with a Bronze Age sky clock marking the new year. We traced a shared human mythology of seven sisters that somehow defied oceans and isolated cultures.
We tracked humanity's shifting perception of scale, too. From Galileo breaking the optical illusion to Messier's pretty petty catalog padding.
Right. And then we explored a modern astrophysical crisis where a geometry error almost broke our understanding of the universe, and we end with this temporary grouping of hot blue stars and brown dwarfs, briefly illuminating a passing cloud of dust.
It really highlights how deeply interconnected the physical mechanics of the universe are with the evolution of human knowledge.
It does. So the next time you step outside on a cold night and spot that tiny misty dipper in Taurus, consider the sheer weight of history attached to it. You're looking at the exact same light that guided ancient Mediterranean sailors, signaled the spring planting for the Maya, and thoroughly terrified modern scientists trying to measure the cosmos.
It's a lot of history for six little stars. But, it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought about the future, too. Well, we know the physics. We know that in 250 million years, those stars will be completely dispersed across the galaxy. If human descendants, or whatever we become, are somehow still around to observe the night sky then, there will be no cluster to look at.
It's a little sad to think about.
It is. Will they sift through our digital archives, study our ancient bronze nubra discs, and read our global myths of the Seven Sisters, and wonder what it must have been like to live in a privileged era?
A time when those lonely, scattered stars used to hold hands in the dark.